Hello and welcome to the Emerging Tech Horizons podcast. I'm Arun Serafin, Executive Director of NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute. Today we're going to talk about using AI to support the federal acquisition workforce. We're going to cover where you are seeing AI being used today, the current barriers to scaling its use, and the requirements for effective adoption of AI for the acquisition workforce. We have two guests today from MITRE to help us with that conversation. Adam Bouffard, who is a group leader and principal decision analyst at MITRE, and Chris Barlow, who is a senior acquisition analyst. Joining them, we also have ETI's associate research fellow and repeat podcast guest, Wilson Miles, joining us. This group co-authored a paper on this topic titled Accelerating the Future, Leveraging AI for Transformative Federal Acquisition. Thanks, guys, for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
So we're going to start by clarifying, we're not here to talk about using tools to acquire AI. We're talking about AI as a tool to help me be a better acquisition professional, right? Just to get that straight. To start off, just help us out. Why is this important? Frame the problem a little bit.
Yeah, so I can do that. So to frame the conversation and why we wanted to write this paper is that it's quite well known within the defense space that the workforce for acquisition, contracting, et cetera, is quite overburdened. This is a workforce that's swimming in data while simultaneously being expected to work faster and faster. There's a whole conversation right now about how do we speed up the development and deployment process for different technologies, and this is the workforce that actually buys those systems. And so, for example, the contracting workforce specifically is an area that a lot of people have some concern about, which is it's a reducing workforce. The retention is quite problematic. And so we're trying to find ways to promote the conversation on how to support this workforce and help them do their job better.
So Chris, what are some of the actual use cases we're talking about here? There's a lot of functions in the acquisition workforce.
Yes, there are.
Which ones are you trying to focus in on here?
So we're right now looking at the left side of the acquisition process. So we're thinking from market research, from program planning, all the way through to the RFI, RFP responses, right? We want to use AI. Some of the initial use cases we're looking at is, can you analyze the RFP responses? Can you analyze the RFI responses? Now, RFP is a little bit sensitive because there's a lot of legalities around RFPs, right? When vendors are proposing information. So you don't want to use AI to make a decision, but what you want to do is use AI to help streamline the human's use or the human element of the review process. So if there are quick wins, things that are repetitive and manually intensive, but not strategic, then you can use AI to help expedite those processes and get great outcomes. So one of the things that we've seen a lot of really early testing in is with finding RFIs, right, and using the AI to synthesize some of the vendor responses so that you can make a better decision of what you need to procure moving forward.
And so is that as simple as sort of just plugging it into ChatGPT and asking it to tell me what you just read?
Sometimes it can be. Sometimes it can be as simple as that, but there's obviously nuance there. We've done some custom work at MITRE and some custom research in programming a backend to help expedite that process. Obviously, AI has hallucinations and there's some potential issues with it. So you want to make sure you have a human in the loop to help you verify that what you're getting from the AI is helpful. But typically, you can automate a lot of the easy pieces, like I need to pull vendor information, I need to pull addresses. You can have the AI pull that for you with a great level of accuracy so the human can focus on the technology that is in those RFI responses.
I was just going to jump in and say, yeah, I think anecdotally, I saw on LinkedIn one individual who was really happy when they used something called MITRE GPT, which is a program for the Air Force. And just very simply, this tool helped him craft questions when looking at vendor proposals. And so it can also be just something as small as that.
And I think also industry is aware that they can create these tools to help us. So they're focused on tools to pull out NAICS codes, maybe small market research things you can do with their tool to bring into your market research report or things like that. So it's not just ChatGPT, and I think industry is responding well to, we need to bring these tools forward. We have several opportunities here where we can help the DoD and really bring forward tools that can be impactful.
So in looking at this issue now, how much of this is real today and how much of it is like classic science and technology, it's ready in 5 years?
So let me jump in here. One of the cool things that we did to help kind of push this research process along was back in October, our team, along with the MITRE team, held this one-day symposium in October at the MITRE facility, and part of it was hosting these lightning talks. And so they were, these quick 5-minute demonstrations of tools ready to go right now, looking at things like market research. And so I think there's a lot of tools out there ready to go right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the tools are being used in the commercial sector at this point?
Absolutely. I think the commercial sector is probably the most innovative right now. Obviously, there's a lot of money in the commercial sector, so they're investing a lot in leveraging AI for different use cases. I think it's a lot harder for the government to implement AI. There's a lot more policy regulation around what they can and can't do, which I think we'll get into in this conversation a little bit later. But industry is definitely investing a lot of resources into maturing AI capabilities.
So what's an example of a commercial use right now?
A good example of a commercial use right now is vendors are using AI to generate responses or to help generate responses to government RFIs and RFPs. And you can see how this is sort of a chicken and an egg problem. If you're the government and you want to use AI to evaluate some of these responses.
So, I mean, you're almost describing what students are doing to professors now,
Absolutely.
Right? Okay. And the professors are arming up also with AI.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
But business to business, commercial side, is there a great example of this commonly used in a commercial sector?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there are, but I operate primarily in the federal space, so I'm not as insightful with business to business.
I think there's tools out there where they're looking at the government and RFPs and things and analyzing those RFPs and where's the money going. And we've had demos come into the MITRE where they're showing us like the DoD is putting their budget here. They're putting a big focus on this particular aspect of it. So companies then know how to target which ones are going to be more fruitful for their businesses and things like that. So they're definitely, AI is moving fast. So companies are, as fast as they can leverage it.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? The workforce is small and overworked. Like Wilson said, they're swimming in data. At the same time, we're pushing everyone to go faster, and we're pushing everyone to make less mistakes, all simultaneously, right? So it kind of makes sense that these tools would support. Are there particular functions that sort of lend themselves best to the early use of AI?
I think from the event that we had in October, as well as conversations that we had before we published the paper, I think at least anecdotally, the area most of interest would be market research. I think that's an area that also people have often quite complained that the government does poorly. Whether or not that's true or not, I can't say. But
because right now it's done by looking through catalogs and reading responses to requests for information. Is that right, basically?
And Googling.
And Googling.
Lots of Googling.
Yeah, I think with the market research, it's like you can be more impactful with the AI and you can distill stuff faster and then be able to get through it. Because, if you put out an RFI and you get 100 responses, you might have a tech team that goes in there and looks at those 100 responses and says, okay, these 10 after a month, 2 months are viable. This is where we need to look at. We have enough viable large businesses, small businesses, things like that. Whereas with the AI, you can do it in 4 to 8 hours or something like that.
And I guess you're saying it doesn't have to be the final answer, but it can
Correct.
at least winnow down the work for the humans.
It enhances for sure. It's not supposed to replace the human in the loop.
Market research is a prime area because there's not a lot of risk of protest, right? There's not a lot of oversight on market research. It's not a highly scrutinized part of the acquisition process from a legal perspective.
But it is mandated by law.
It is mandated, but you don't have the legal teams reviewing your market research and saying, you need to do more here, more there, or less here, less there. The vendors are going to contest this if they see your market research. That's sort of the informative piece that leads into, okay, we think that this is what the acquisition needs based on our market research, or this is what the art of the possible is when we go through the acquisition process.
Right.
I think it also gets people used to using the tools, right? Like if you're doing market research and you screw it up, you can go back and start over and try and learn better prompts, better ways to use the tools. What are the outputs? Can we templatize the RFI to make a better output? So there's course correction in market research, whereas if you're in a source selection and you screw up, then using the AI tools or something like that, then the legal implications come into effect.
In the event, and in the paper, you guys walk through some very specific use cases, some examples where, you show how AI can be embedded throughout the life cycle. So can you talk through a couple of those use cases?
So Chris mentioned the RFI one. That's a good, I call it a starter AI. And that's sort of how I started on the AI, was they brought me in. I was sort of an AI skeptic, and they said, we want you to use this tool as a skeptic, take 15 responses to an RFI and create a market research report. Tell us how long it takes you. So I went through that, and in about 4 hours, I had a 60% solution to a market research report with all the business information summarized.
In 4 hours?
Yes.
How long would that normally take someone?
Yeah.
Oh, a while. If you're going through each of the tech, probably for one person, maybe a weekish. Just depends on the responses and things like that. But typically, it's a team, right? And you have a tech team in there. And it's like, summarize this, summarize that, tell us about how many large businesses, how many small businesses. Now, the tech team would say, based on these outputs, this is the viability of these actual capabilities, whereas the AI is just summarizing it and giving them the facts. I would say another one would be, so we've done a lot of work with sponsors where we release concept papers, and they give us a 10-page paper back around a certain capability. The AI, again, could go in and summarize and say, based on what you've put in, how you're going to look at their concept papers, these would be viable candidates. And then again, you plug the human in the loop back in, they go in and verify, but you're getting that 60% starting point. And that's really, it enhances, I'm going to keep saying enhances, it enhances everything in terms of, it gives you a starting point, which is the hardest part a lot of the times for teams, is getting to that starting point.
So in the idea of using it to evaluate concept papers and reduce the load on the human staff, what's the impact then on the industry proposers?
I would say multiple impacts. One, they're going to have to do their due diligence in their responses, right? Because now they're having not only the human in the loop look at it, but also the AI look at it. And it's also shifting sort of how the government is acquiring and how they ask people to propose against that. So they might have to do a live demonstration where they come in and actually show what they can do and their capabilities. They might have to do a video response. They might have to do a Q&A. So they're going to start getting away from, I think, more paper responses, because the AI will be able to sort of enhance, give answers to things that you may not have thought of before that the teams are going to get now. So you're going to have to really bring your A game in terms of how you propose and how you go about getting your work.
Do you think you can say anything confidently about error rates?
I mean, you will always need the human in the loop. Like, you're not going to pop 15 concept papers into a thing and say, okay, AI, tell us which company to pick. It's going to spit out all the information that comes from it that you ask of it in your prompts. And then from there, you're going to have to do your normal type of evaluation of, okay, the AI may have said something that's not true about their capability. We know this as the tech team. And then you can go forward with that information knowing that it had made an error. So it's going to make errors. It's going to say things that may not necessarily go against what you are asking it to prompt. But you're always going to have the human in the loop, because you have to have that check and balance, right?
And in the world where it's easier and easier to develop concept papers, and we're simultaneously opening up the aperture for different kinds of competitions, right? The open topics under Small Business Innovation Research, the commercial solutions openings, which are just, we're trying to expand our outreach to more of the defense industrial base while we're reducing the size of the workforce. I guess I don't see any other way other than automating some of these processes. Is there a requirement for this yet?
That's a great question. I haven't seen, from the view that I have, a requirement for this, but it's absolutely necessary if you want to maintain efficiency or enhance efficiency within the acquisition process.
Okay.
When you're looking at the reduction of the workforce, a workforce that is traditionally looked at as overworked already, and now we're taking numbers of people away, support away, you have to introduce something to help enhance that process that's outside of human hands.
Right.
Unless you're going to find a way to increase the workforce, which could be done through different levels of training, could be done through trying to give different types of rewards for bringing people into certain organizations. That doesn't seem to be on the horizon. So the only way that I foresee enhancement is through automation, leveraging AI, and bringing new capabilities on to have these contracting officers and acquisition professionals do more with less.
And DoD and NASA, for example, had human calculators. Now they don't have human calculators anymore. Most offices we worked in had secretaries typing. We don't have those anymore. These kinds of things have been automated, and I guess you're just talking about the next logical thing to automate here is some of these acquisition processes. Okay, but no change in DoD is easy. And Wilson, I think you looked at the barriers
Yes.
that might prevent some of this from happening. So what are some of the barriers that need to be overcome?
Yeah, so we looked at three. We looked at cultural, technical, and then policy. Our sense in terms of policy barriers is really that there is none. There's nothing in the FAR, for example, that says, employees can't use AI for a particular tool. There are kind of caveats to that with inherently governmental functions. However, the biggest policy obstacle is really ATOs. I think that's a well-known.
What's an ATO?
Authority to operate. It essentially allows a commercial vendor to plug into DoD's software ecosystem, and it's been well known as a barrier to small, medium, and non-traditional businesses in the commercial sector. I think there's a really interesting conversation around the cultural barriers, which is around incentives primarily. And so with contracting officers, for example, they work in a highly regulatory field. There's they're very process driven. And so it's an interesting conversation around how do you get these individuals to experiment with new tools? How do you get them to trust these new tools and essentially, change their entire workflow? And so admittedly, in my conversations at least, I didn't hear anything that sounded concrete about how you get people to use these tools outside of just forcing them to use these tools and experiment and expose them. But so that's certainly one area that I think there's that's ripe for more conversation. And then there's the technical side of this, which is I will say that there's an interesting conversation around inputs and outputs, and that DoD has built this system that makes it very hard to track how long certain tasks take you now versus what Adam was describing later when you have a tool, it took him 4 hours. There aren't necessarily those clear metrics for every possible task. And so when you look at, you have X budget and you say, I have so much money to spend on overhead or the back office type functions, I need a clear return on investment. And so it's not entirely understood of how long it takes to take, or for an individual to do one task and why it's beneficial to use a particular AI tool.
So I guess I don't believe the inherently governmental issue here, right? Because a human can perform an inherently governmental function and still use their Outlook calendar and their calculator to do the math, and their computer to Google, but still be the human that performs the function. Is there a function written somewhere that is inherently governmental and also is not allowed to be automated?
I don't believe so.
Yeah.
I think this goes back to human agent. This goes back to the human is the decision maker. So however you got from A to Z, and Z being the product, whatever the acquisition artifact is that you're working towards, as long as you get to Z and then the human reviews it, signs off on it, at the end of the day, the human is the person with the responsibility, not the AI. So the tools that you use to get to that moment of responsibility where you're saying, yes, this is good enough, let's go forward with this, that doesn't necessarily matter. What matters is that the human is the one ultimately taking on that risk at the end of the day. So it's their responsible use of the AI that really matters the most.
So if you use AI to support a source selection decision, they could sift through all of the data on the proposals. They could sift through past performance data if you wanted them to. You in the end, as the source selection official, would be the one who have to defend the decision.
Yes,
right.
You'd have to be able to justify not only your decision, but any information that you derived from the AI outputs.
Yeah.
You would have to justify why those were legitimate and how the AI got to those answers.
Right. And I'm not even sure how it opens up more windows of protest, though theoretically it could. I can't protest because I think your calculator was off, right? Or you do bad Google searches. I protest your decision and not being reflective of reality. I'm not sure
Yeah.
how use of AI changes that.
I think you'd probably have to declare AI is going to be a part of our evaluation process, and then that would probably seal up the risk of, like, get rid of the risk of protest. But I think for all this stuff, like the cultural, the technical, the policies, it's top cover. Like, you need top cover. You need somebody, a senior official, that's saying, I want you to use these tools. You're incentivized to use these tools. I want you to come back to us with metrics around why this tool, like, if I go to, an SES and I say, hey, I just reviewed this RFI, here's my market research report. I did it in 4 hours with the AI. I would like you to read through it, tell me what I can do. And then they are like, wow, you did this in 4 hours? Like, this is so in depth. And so if you can get a senior official to let it flow down, then I think it breaks through the cultural barriers and the technical barriers and the policy barriers.
Yeah, and like Wilson said, you need some of those baselines so you understand that this
Yes.
did used to take 4 hours. The barrier you didn't mention, which I thought you were going to mention, is data. Every AI conversation always begins with, if we have the data, the AI can be great. Do we have the data in this case?
I think it's a lot of siloed data, and we could do a much better job of sharing across different federal agencies, different DoD entities. So I think it's there. But yes, the data fidelity and how good the data is, and even the stuff you're ingesting to maybe create templates for stuff or things like that through the AI, it has to be good on that side, and it has to be.
So for example, if you wanted to train a market research tool, do we have data to train a market research tool?
You
I
do,
think so, yeah.
you do have data. The data question is a little bit more complicated than do we have data? We have data. The answer to that is an explicit yes. The problem with data is the data structured? Is it clean? Is it accurate? And I can tell you with
So it's water everywhere, but not a drop to drink, right? That
right,
kind of thing.
right.
Okay.
We got a bunch of ocean, but we don't have any clean water, right? I can tell you some federal agencies have an issue with keeping their data accurate. It'll take weeks to months to update. And so they're always looking at a historical view of their data. They don't ever have real metrics that they can make a decision on right now. And so when you think about the context of, if you're going to plug that data into an AI capability to help you make better data-driven decisions, you're always looking a month in the past. You don't really know where you're standing today. So to think about that analogy, if you want to use data, wouldn't it be better to address your data infrastructure first and the way that you collect and maintain and organize your data, so that you do have a clearer picture of today, and then work on the automation piece of it? Or, like, does the chicken come before the egg in this case?
I guess I would say, compared to a human, even 6-month-old data that's actually used and processed is better than what's done.
I would agree. I would agree that it's better. The problem is that their 6-month-old data is still not clean.
Right.
Right. So it's hard. We'd have to get into the technical conversation of how does the AI use the data, right? One of the use cases that we spoke about earlier with the RFI, I actually ran a test on this a couple months ago where we used a sponsor's RFI responses, and we were looking across those RFI responses, and we were asking very specific questions of the AI. Say, okay, pull this piece out for me and create a list of all the vendors that gave you this information. Some vendors would respond within the page limits that the government said of 2 pages. Some vendors would send a 23-page PDF with a bunch of sales and marketing materials in it. Now, there's no punishment for that because it's an RFI. There's no decision, there's no down select coming from this. So it's just information to help inform the government before they go out for an RFP, right? Or start a different phase of the acquisition process. What we're learning is that if the AI doesn't know how to look at the data and analyze it, then you're not going to get accurate responses from the AI. So for instance, if I ask the AI in that use case, summarize all of the technical proposals by the vendor and organize them by realism, right? And I gave it some sort of scale, which again, very theoretical in practice, not a real way to prompt the AI. It had a hard time doing that with some of the responses. It didn't even register that the vendor submitted any technical proposal or technical response in their RFI because it was so dispersed throughout the document, it couldn't pull that there was specific data for this response. But yet you go read the 23-page RFI and all it is technical information. So it's really interesting how the data has to be ingested by the AI for it to get value out of it.
But over time, with more examples, it should learn like every AI does.
Absolutely. It should definitely get better. I mean, look at OpenAI. It seems like every 2 weeks they're releasing a new iteration, right, with enhanced capabilities in a specific area. Maybe there's more reasoning. Maybe it's just better at doing daily tasks, right? You can now schedule AI to do daily things for you. So yeah, AI is definitely enhancing faster than I think we can track, especially federal agencies can track. And that's something that we need to keep a pulse on, because that will help enhance the outcomes of acquisition if we're able to catch onto that wave.
You guys are talking about buying tools to help people who buy what DoD considers important. And DoD has never considered buying tools for its acquisition workforce important, at least in my opinion. So who exactly would be responsible for buying these AI services and tools and giving them out to the market researchers and the source selectors and the white paper evaluators of the acquisition work?
It's probably going to be your contracts director, the head of contract activity would have to direct, hey, we're going to test these out. I remember DHS PIL was sort of like
What's
this
PIL?
Procurement Innovation Lab.
Thank you. So at the PIL, when it first came out, people were like, what is this thing? And then once they saw that they were injecting innovation and coming up with different ways to acquire things and different ways to go about it, everybody started to say, oh, I want to use the DHS PIL. So if you have the head of your contracting activity and they're like, hey, we're going to try out these 3 or 4 tools, they come up with metrics around measuring the impacts of those tools, and they encourage 1102s to go out and use these tools for market research, come back to us, or pick like 5 big projects where they're going to be the pilot projects and they're going to use these tools and then bring back the impacts. And then once they learn how to use it, they're teaching other 1102s. So I think it's really the HCA and the contracts director would have to come back and just say, hey, we're going to test these tools out. I know MITRE is looking at potentially having some sort of like an innovation lab where you can send 1102s and say, okay, bring your actual use case. We have a license for these specific tools. You can play with the tool, use the tool. We'll have knowledgeable people there to show you how to do the prompts, how to use the tool, and you can get outcomes from there. So there's definitely ways to do it.
What's an 1102?
Oh, it's just I think it's Navy specific, but it's for contracts professionals.
Given that it's going to have to occur, there is no PEO acquisition tools, right? So it's going to have to occur in all these different individual program offices, or potentially someplace like GSA, right? It's like an 18F that doesn't exist anymore. Style function, which is trying to create these cool tools. Is there anyone that's sort of leaning forward and doing some stuff now?
Absolutely. Right now, there is a federal sponsor that I'm supporting that is looking at integrating AI tools and capabilities across all of their program management operations. It is very slow rolling. It is very much, we are dipping our toe in the water. We're exploring. We don't know what the art of the possible is, but we're going to bring in some expertise to help us figure out what does it look like and how do we sustain this. But I would say for organizations that are looking to do this, there are some critical thoughts that you need to think through before going through this exercise. One, how do you intend on having your workforce use these tools? Are you offering a set of tools to say, hey, we want to support you guys, you have these tools to use at your discretion? Or are you saying these are now a mandatory part of our process, you will use these tools because we paid for them, we've got them installed to make you more efficient, and we are now going to direct that you use these tools? So organizations need to think through what that looks like for them. Obviously, when you're adopting these tools, there's a certain life cycle of adoption that needs to happen where you're getting users up to speed. The whole workforce is comfortable. They understand how it works, how to use it, what the outputs need to look like, what is acceptable and unacceptable from these tools. So the whole adoption process needs to be thought through. But if you're going to mandate the use of it, it's going to look like a much slower adoption process than if you're just throwing up a bunch of tools and saying, hey guys, go use these because we're offering them to you to help you do your job better.
Chris is saying quite nicely, start with the workflow, not the model. And I think a lot of people might have the tendency to think about, oh, I have this tool at my disposal, how do I use it? And my guess is that the most effective tools and the most impact you're going to have is when you have a very clear problem or workflow that you're trying to augment. And then you're saying, okay, how can I build a tool that is much more specific rather than general?
And the tools exist available now in the commercial world.
Depends on your use case. There are a lot of tools that are available right now, but especially for some parts of the federal acquisition process, AI is still very new to this space. When we first started doing research on on using AI for RFI responses, we couldn't find any player in industry who was doing this yet. So MITRE built a prototype. We used our own internal research funding to see what was the art of the possible here. And I don't think that we haven't seen a vendor replicate what we've done yet, but we know that it's coming. This is a space that very heavily manually intensive, right? Is ripe for innovation. So we do expect that over the next 2 to 5 years, maybe even sooner, we'll see a bunch of vendors coming out in this space. I know there are vendors right now that used to do contract management systems, and they are now looking at integrating AI into the contract management systems. It'll start parlaying down into that acquisition process more and more as the technology advances.
Yeah, I mean, we buy expensive contract writing systems now, right? Each service buys their own. I would think by now those have got AI pieces hidden underneath them.
Absolutely. There are a lot of vendors that are integrating AI within those contract writing systems. But again, it goes back to the process, right? To what Wilson was saying. When you look at the workflow, where does your workforce need to focus the most on enhancing? What are the bottlenecks within your specific organization?
I would say yes, but also planning phase, like you said, you want low risk and enhancement. And then I think from there, you can potentially build into more risky phases because they're already used to it. They know how to use the tools. Now they're in a phase where they can confidently report out to legal and anybody that needs to know, like, this is how I used it. Here's how I prompted it. Here's the outputs. Here's how we assessed it. And that's what built into our final decision around who was awarded the contract.
Right. You got to get the oversight community comfortable. In this world, you got to get the protest community comfortable as well. Okay, can't have a MITRE report or an ETI report without some really clever recommendations. So what are your favorite recommendations that came out of all this work?
So I'll start. I think one of the easiest things to do would be in the upcoming FY26 NDA, there should be some language encouraging the department to explore more pilot programs. So I think we talked about the Army has some, the Air Force has some, but explore more programs using commercially available tools. Within that language, there should be those clear metrics that we discussed, and also something that we haven't talked about today is transitioning those tools is really, really important. And I think having a good understanding of, okay, if this tool actually works, then what are we going to do with it? And thinking through those beforehand.
What's a recommendation to go after the cultural issues?
I think in the paper, the one that really caught me was like using DAU giving legitimacy to maybe an acquisition AI certification or at least acquisition AI classes and bringing folks in. And the more you can expose, like I told you guys, when I started, Chris and Ryan were working on it at MITRE and they were like, hey, we want you to come in on this group, test this tool. And I was like, I went through contract writing systems and I was like, I might be too far in my career for AI. And then once you use it and see how much it can enhance, now, I'm going in and using it for other things throughout work and using, MITRE GPT and all these other things that I wasn't used to before. So I think DAU can kind of break the ice with that and bring folks in, and especially, maybe folks later in their career that are like, no, not for me. I know how to do contracts. I don't need AI. But once they see what it can do and the ease of doing it with these tools, I think it will help to break through that cultural barrier.
Something I just thought of, it's not in the paper, but, there are all these experimentation events, through Raider, but you could have something similar, but for acquisition, where you just have a bunch of demos together to show people that this thing works.
So you guys put out the report, you had the event. First, Wilson, where can I find the report?
Reports on the Emerging Technologies Institute.org's website.
And what are you guys going to do next?
We're in the very early stages, but we're thinking about doing some sort of webinar series, but really drilling down on a specific part of the acquisition process.
Particular function,
just focus on market research, just focus on pick your topic.
We're thinking function or possibly phase. So the paper breaks it down into 5 phases, the whole acquisition lifecycle. So maybe a webinar per phase or maybe a webinar per function within that phase.
And if NDIA members either have tools that they're interested in showing you, or potentially NDIA members in the government want to make use of tools that you're aware of, how do they do that?
You could reach me at my NDIA email, wmiles@ndia.org, or you can find the contact information on our website.
Well, we
We
don't
have-
have a kind of a rodeo yet for AI tools for acquisition. That doesn't exist quite yet.
Not yet. We're looking at doing something like that potentially in the future. We'll have to see how things play out, but that is a potential item on our roadmap.
Yeah, the innovation lab is something we've been sort of spitballing with at MITRE, is having that lab where people can just come in and use it. Maybe working with DAU to do that type of thing where they can bring people in for training and things like that. But for now, it's just like Wilson said, reach out.
All right, that's great. Well, I want to thank Adam Chris Wilson for joining us for this conversation about AI tools in the acquisition workforce. Appreciate you guys joining us.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
All right, I want to thank everyone for joining us for Emerging Tech Horizons. Please visit ETI's website to sign up for our mailing list and register for our various webinars, events, and educational offerings, including our Tech 101 series. Visit our YouTube channel at Emerging Tech ETI to see all of our past podcasts, webinars, and our other content. We're excited to announce the third NDIA Emerging Technologies for Defense Conference and Exhibition. It's going to be held August 27th through 29th at Washington, D.C. Convention Center. Maybe you guys will be presenting some of this work there. The conference website is now up at www.ndiatechexpo.org. We're working with a number of organizations in the department, including the Joint Chiefs of Staff, OSD, the CDAO, the services, UCOM, AFRICOM, and other COCOMs on programming for the event. We're putting together, just like the first 2 years, keynote sessions and breakout panels, as well as technical presentations that allow you to see the latest administration initiatives and partnership opportunities. We're also going to have opportunities for NDIA members to share your great research, services, and technologies. Special thank you to Melanie Yu and Daniel Park for producing this podcast. Thanks so much again for tuning into Emerging Tech Horizons.